Hey everyone, everybody hear me? Hi Brandon. Let me know if you're able to hear me. Hey Randy. Great. I guess any response means you can hear me. I apologize. I thought I had this figured out where I could switch back and forth from camera to camera, and it's not allowing me to do so. But you don't care about seeing my face, anyways. We're more concerned about the fly tying. Um, I'll give a couple minutes here for people to roll in, but just kind of a background on what I'll be tying tonight. I'm going to start out with a simple soft hackle. The reason I want to tie with this one is tying. I'm going to tie it with silk thread. I think that's something that's been kind of lost in a lot of modern tying, but it's a great material, even by itself. And then second fly I'm going to tie tonight is I call it just kind of a trout spay soft hackle. It's something it's just a style of fly that I've been tying for a while. I started tying them because they're really fun to tie, and then I keep tying them because they catch fish. And then the last fly I'm going to tie will be close to John Atherton's number 6 dry fly. I'll tie it with a little bit of a modern twist, a little bit less Catskill style. But let's see, we have a few people in here now. Hey everyone, glad to hear I sound great. I'm looking forward to hanging out with everybody tonight. All right. So before I get going and tying, I just want to say thank you to Whiting Farms for having me on. It's a real privilege, and I appreciate it. So I guess without further ado, I'm going to start by tying the one of these soft hackles that you see that I have in my vise here. It's a basic, simple soft hackle tied with a silk body, and then I've got a Whiting Hen Cape feather for the hackle, and just a little bit of a custom dubbing blend here for the dub in the thorax. So I'm going to tie this on a number 14. This is just a Arex dry fly hook. Stick this guy in the vise here. And I mentioned I'm tying this with silk. This is since the Pearsall's has gotten pretty hard to find since they don't make it anymore. This 54 Dean Street's a great substitute. And what I like about it is the spools are regular spool size. They fit on a normal bobbin rather than the janky bobbin that I had to customize to tie Pearsall's or tie with Pearsall's. Hey Bill. Hey Mike. I'm also in Idaho here. I'm in Boise, Idaho. Randy can hear me now. This spot is the best. Aha, yeah. I only recognize that from the name on the spool here. And I don't know what it means. But I'm going to start here by just dressing the hook back to the bend. Clip off my tag here. I'm going to make 2 passes. Before I do so, I'm just going to throw a little bit of wax, and this is just like traditional dubbing wax, the Wapsi stuff that I've had forever. It'll darken the thread, and it'll also knock down like any stray fibers that you get. If you are dubbing silk, the wax is almost a necessity. Then I'm just going to make touching wraps back up to the front here. You can see some of that wax. You may or may not be able to see some of it kind of popping through there. It is a fine fly tying product. I'll have to look up what their soy. I don't know. I'm not fluent in French by any stretch of the imagination. So now I've got my body dressed. I tried to keep the thread touching the whole way, keep that body nice and clean. With silk, it cords up, and it's really easy to do with silk. If you haven't tied with silk before, I highly recommend giving it a try. It's also a really good way to learn to manage your thread wraps, because it is, it's not the modern tying thread that we're used to that's very fine and can lay really flat. It requires you to be a little more precise with the placement of your wraps. Got probably about twice as much dubbing as I need. This dub is a mix of hare's mask shaved right off like between the ears, and some pine squirrel dubbing pine squirrel that I trimmed off of some pine squirrel zonkers. It kind of had like a reddish color, so the natural hare's mask combined with that pine squirrel dub makes a nice buggy kind of reddish brown color. And I guess I should mention the reason I chose these colors is I actually had a fantastic day fishing a mahogany mayfly hatch with this pattern last year. I was fishing, trying all kinds of different dries, cripples, parachutes, and they were working okay, but not with a ton of success. And then I tied on this soft hackle and greased it up and fished it in the film, and I had one of the better dry fly days I did all last summer. So now you can see I've kind of built up a bulky thorax here. I'm just going to make a couple wraps that I can tie my hackle in with. So I've got this red label. It's a really pretty hen cape. It's the barred dark ginger. So I'm going to grab a feather, and when I size these, with soft hackles, the sizing can really vary depending on what style you're going for. With this one, I want the hackle, when it's laid back, to the tips to come right about to the end of the body. I think I've got one here. This might be a hair short, but it'll work. And the tip's broken off of this one, but I'm not using the tip, so I'm not concerned. So what I like to do before I tie my soft hackle feather in is just pull a few of the barbs back so that I have this portion that I've left untouched, where I'm going to use that to tie in. There's a few different ways to tie in your soft hackle, and on the next fly I tie, I'm going to show you one more, but this way with the silk works pretty well. And then I'm just going to take, that's my tip there, just going to come in and trim that off right next to the fly there. And I actually left myself probably a little more room at the head than what I need here, but that's okay. And then before I wrap, I'm going to fold this feather. Now this is something you can either do, you can prep your feathers and do this ahead of time. I find it's easiest when you've got that tip secured to to fold the feather this way. So I'm just taking and basically preening and pinching right around the ricus or the stem. And that way, when I make my wraps, all those barbs lay back nice. And for this one, I'm just going to make 2 wraps. These hen capes have really nice barb density, so any more than that's really not necessary. And like I said, I definitely picked a feather just a hair smaller than what I wanted there, but it'll fish. As long as the fish aren't busting out their micrometers. Hi, David from the Black Hills. That's a place I've never been, but I'd love to visit. Here's I knew I was gonna regret tying with silk tonight, but the silk's not waxed and tends to be a little bit springy. So like there, I should have made one more wrap to secure this before I let it go. But if you make a wrap over and then a couple wraps in front, it won't move. So tip this up, doing this so you can see coming in. It looks like I left a couple strays here. And then with the silk, trying to minimize my wraps to not bulk it up. Southwest Missouri. Never been there. Hey, Michael. And then just to whip finish here. And one thing to note when you're whip finishing, I don't think this gets talked about enough, but always make sure you're whip finishing from back to front, because as you do so, you'll actually protect your tie-off thread. If you have problems where you're whip finishing, you're like, oh man, I need head cement because my flies always blow up, I'd be willing to bet that that's the problem, is because the trout tooth hits that piece of thread that's just coming across and exposed, and your fly's no good. But so that's that. It's a simple, effective pattern. I don't know what you'd call this. It's similar to like a partridge in orange. Just I've added that thorax in there because it has a little bit more of that emerger appearance to it, where you have the fly coming out of the dry coming out of the nymph. But yeah, it's simple. You can tie it in a bunch of different colors. Like I said, this color I use for mahoganies, and it worked exceptionally well for me last year. But purple, orange, black, you tie them small for midges. But thanks, Randy. Ashley from Tasmania, Australia. That's another place I'd like to visit. That definitely the furthest away from me here in Idaho so far. So the next fly I'm going to tie. I'll throw this in the vise for you. Another simple but slightly more complex soft hackle. This is, I call these just a trout spay soft hackle. They're fun to tie, simple. I started tying these. I really wanted to get into tying steelhead flies, and I didn't have a lot of the fancy materials at the time that are required for steelhead flies. And I saw a lot of started to employ some of those techniques, and ultimately started tying flies like this. I've tied it in a million different colors and variations, and I'm very much still a novice when it comes to trout spay fishing, but it is a blast. There's not much better than swinging a fly and having a fish hammer it. So without further ado, this one's tied on a Daiichi 1760. I'm going to tie on a Alec Jackson Phantom, or not the Phantom, it's the black covert nymph hook, which is the exact same as a Daiichi 1760, but it's this pretty black color. This is a number 9. I'll tie these from like size 12, maybe as small as 14 if I was trying to imitate like a particular insect, but up to like a size 5 or size 3. I'll tie them on sometimes on like an actual steelhead return eye hook. But for this one, I'm going to use Danville, just the classic 6/0 Danville. It's generally my go-to thread. I really just like the way it lays down, and I like the colors. This is like I believe it's the rusty brown. I always forget the color of the Danville threads because they don't put them on the spool. It's the only thing I wish. So half the time when I order them online, I end up ordering like 3 different colors just to make sure that I get the one that I want. So for this one, I'm going to start by tying in the tail. And this is kind of something I picked up from, just looking at some steelhead tires, Alec Jackson being one of them. I love his style of tying, but not using the entire shank of the hook. I've heard the term tying small on big. It's I think it's more of an aesthetic thing, but I like the way it looks, and I like tying them this way. So I'm just using, for the tail, this is a fire orange Schlappen. I've just got like, I don't know, 6 or 8 fibers here, barbs. I'm going to tie those in so they stick just a little bit past the end of the hook there. And then I'm just going to wrap back up towards the head. And those, you can just pull them back and break them. They're pretty fragile, but they're soft enough where they, when you're fishing it doesn't tend to break off like pheasant tail or some of your other more brittle materials. Now, I've got some wire laying here. This is I find myself gravitating towards this color. It's this amber UTC wire. I use it way more than I don't know, maybe not more than I should, because it's a great color. It's kind of a universal brownish, goldish, but this is the brassy size. I'm going to tie it in on my side. I'll show you. So I'm tying it in just behind the head. And I'm not really concerned right now. This is all getting covered up, so the appearance isn't super important, but I do like to lay the wire nice and straight along that body, because I am just doing a thread body. If I was, sometimes I'll do a dubbed body, so I'm not as particular about it, but here I'm just going to build this abdomen up a little bit. I've got my thread corded up pretty good right now, so that it builds up fast. The body will be a little bit rough, but by the time you wrap the wire, it's hardly noticeable. If you want, you can kind of burnish it too, where you just take something hard. Traditionally, like burnisher's made out of bone, but sometimes I'll even use like the handle of my whip finisher, or even like the handle of my scissors, and just rub them, rub it back and forth and smooth out the body that way. And with that wax thread, a lot of times it'll straighten out some of those gaps. If I'm being really particular, I could flatten out my thread and make a one pass back and forth across it. That would really smooth out the body. But it's the fish won't mind a little bit of coarseness there. So now I'm going to take, and this is just something I kind of started doing. I'd seen other people tie a tag like this, if you will, with the wire, where I make 3 or 4 touching wraps there at the back. But it reminds me a little bit of the tags that are on a traditional steelhead or salmon fly. You'll notice I do not use a half hitch or a bobbin cradle. especially when I'm making forward wraps like this. If it gets too bulky, I'll just back those wraps up. Make sure I'm not missing any questions here. All right, looks like I'm up to date. So now I'm just gonna tie that wire off and smooth this out a little bit. You see that body's relatively short, the abdomen's relatively short in relationship to the whole fly. And on this one, I actually use 2 hackles. So this rear hackle, I'm going to use, this is another red label hen cape. This one's a grizzly dyed Coachman brown. Hey, Nick. Nick's a good friend of mine. He promised he'd come in here and harass me, and I told him he didn't have the guts. So this feather, in relation to the fly, the hackle's gonna be relatively short. But what I'm doing with this one is tying it behind the front hackle, as it both creates a contrast. It creates a contrast, and it also helps to prop that front hackle and push a little bit more water. Get a drink of water here real quick. Who do I think I am, and how dare you? How dare me? I think I'm some bum fly tyer that was fortunate to be invited to tie on here, and I dare. So with this one, I'm just tying in by the tip again. So I've prepped that feather just like I did on the last one. This one has the tip intact, but same idea. And then I'm just going to grab this, make a couple wraps. Doesn't have to be pretty. And then I'm going to fold that back and make a couple wraps in front just to secure that. Trim out those unwanteds. Wish you had one of every wing whiting has. Man, that would, I'd like one of every cape and saddle. I don't know, I have a fair amount, but there's always some that I'm oogling the different colors. But I still have to stay married, so I can't buy everything that I like. Let's see. So now, again, I'm going to use a little bit of dubbing here. And for the dubbing, this is a kind of fun mix of snowshoe foot dub and Angora goat. It's a blend that I started making up, and I've got it in a billion different colors now because I've experimented with it a ton. But I was looking for a way to add a little bit of flash while still using a natural material. That Angora goat has a real similar characteristic to seal, which is harder to get a hold of now, especially if you want it legal. But I love tying with this Angora goat, and it makes it a little bit more user friendly when it's blended up with the rabbit. I just use the coffee grinder to grind those up, and it mixes it really well. Or not grind them, but mix. So there you can see I just did a thin noodle and dubbing that thorax. It doesn't have to be perfect. I'm just going to wrap the hackle up through here. But I'm going to do the same thing I did on the last one and fold the feather, preening these barbs back around the ricus. Like I said, I just kind of pull and make a little pinch there right around the ricus, and that is going to make this feather lay down a lot nicer. And then I'm going to do the spiral wraps, candy cane wraps, if you will, spaced out. And usually I get 3 or 4 wraps here. And then I want to leave room at the eye here because, like I said, I'm going to tie in a second hackle, front hackle. Come in here and trim out the excess. Make just a couple wraps to secure any strays. I got a couple pieces of dubbing there. So that's what I've got, and you could honestly probably fish it just like that if you wanted to. But again, with kind of the Spay style, there's multiple layers and multiple hackles involved. So that's where I started doing this, and I think I mentioned I like the having the two different hackles. You get a little bit of a contrast, and it pushes a little bit more water when you're swinging it, while still remaining sparse enough to sink pretty quickly. So for the front hackle on this one, to me, this is one of the most underrated products that whiting has. This is a Hebert Minor line hen saddle, and it's the wild type brown color. The colors on the wild type can kind of vary a little bit. This one's a little bit darker brown with some like almost gold modeling to it. But I think it's just beautiful. It has speckling similar to that of like a partridge feather, which often I will use a partridge feather for these front hackles on this, but this stuff's great. So you can see what I've done here is I've taken just down from the tip. I kind of found the spot where the hackle isn't tapering and it's all uniform size, and then I stripped off the one side. And the only reason I'm doing that, it has nothing to do with like the cleanliness of the tying. It's purely because I want it to be a little more sparse. And just because the density on these wild type, or on the hen saddles in general, is really good. There's a ton of barbs per length on there. So this one I'm going to tie in just a little bit different. You can see I cut, hopefully you can see this, I cut most of that tip off and left just a little triangle there. And the reason I do that is so that I don't have to trim. Since this front hackle, I want it to have a nice clean head. I'm just going to tie it in there right like that. And then I don't have to worry about trimming it. One thing you do want to make sure is that you leave enough triangle there that as you go to wrap it, you're not pulling that out, because that can be really frustrating. So here, I'm just going to make 2 wraps again. It seems like 2 wraps is kind of my go-to rule of thumb for front hackle on most soft hackle flies. That's not always, but seems to usually give a good result. And then I'm just going to snake my thread through the fibers there. Tie this guy off. Snip that nice and close to the fiber. You can actually see, I was talking about how the rear hackle is kind of pushing that front hackle out, propping it up. Again, when I whip finish, starting from back, working to the front. Thread, I will do a double whip finish there. Like I said, these are a super fun fly to swing. I've tied some of these similar to fish during a drake hatch too. Just fished it really close to the surface, like trailing behind a green drake dry fly, and that worked really well. Different color, obviously. They're more olive, but yeah, they're super fun to tie. This is like if I have tires block and I want to tie something, I usually just start tying something along these lines because it kind of reinforces a lot of different techniques as far as manipulating hackle, getting it to do what I want, um, and there's something to me that's like almost therapeutic about wrapping soft hackles. So thanks, Randy. Appreciate that. Anybody have any questions right now? The next one, I'm going to tie kind of a one-off of a Atherton's number 6. If you're not familiar with John Atherton, I highly encourage you to look him up. He is a tyer from the 50s, New York based, but had a kind of a unique take on fly tying. He has a series of nymphs, wet flies, and dry flies, and they're all kind of based off the same idea. They're all similar patterns with the what's the word he uses? Oh man, I'm going to space this, but they all have a similar profile, a suggestive profile, but he ties them in a range from light to dark to imitate a variety of insects. Thanks, Tom. So this is I could put this in the vise, but this is the Atherton's number 6 that I'll be tying. This one's a little more traditional than what I'm going to go for tonight. But what I love is Atherton's background was kind of in tying classic salmon steelhead flies, so he uses some of those materials in his more simple nymphs and dry flies, which is fun to see. For instance, the wing on this one, or wings, are tied out of bronze mallard feathers. So bronze mallard is often used for wings on classic steelhead wet flies, but it has a great modeling to it. So what I usually do is after I've tied a number of steelhead flies out of my bronze mallard feathers, I will keep them rather than tossing them. This one's actually, I probably could have gotten a couple more wings out of it, but I've got a bunch. So I use the scraps basically for tying wings. I have the hands of a Greek god. Thanks, Kelly. I forgot to get my manicure before this, but So I'm going to take a fair amount of this, probably a ½ inch. And what I've done is I take a clump of these barbs, I pull them until the tips are aligning nicely. And once I've got them aligned there, I'll just strip them off, and I keep them pinched really tight so that those tips stay right together, or right aligned. Oh, and of course, I blew that, but I think I got them back. The wings may not be the most perfect, but they'll get it done. So then you can see I've got my tips aligned pretty closely there, and I'm going to tie them in off the front. And I always tie them in just a little bit longer than what I'm going to leave them, and I'll come back and adjust. It's a lot easier to pull the feathers back with the grain rather than fighting against. So I'll pull that there, and then I will just slide them back a little bit. I should mention there's a couple different ways to tie in a feather wing like this. This is my preference. I'm going to back off and just shorten it up a little bit more. One thing that oh man, I'll line these up. I always try to make sure that the wings are longer than the hackle that I'm using. I want them to stick up, probably 1.5 times that length of the hackle. And it's somewhat an appearance thing, but drives me crazy if the wings barely stick up above the hackle. So now I've got those butts. I want to get the butts tied down tight so that I'm not fighting them. Making a couple wraps in front and behind just to get these standing up nice and straight. I guess you can see here I've got the wing tied in about a third back from the eyelid. So my next step here is, and you can use a bodkin to do this. On a smaller fly, I probably would, but I wanted to make it easy on your eyes and easy on me by tying a little bit larger tonight. You can actually see it, but so I split the wings there, and then I'm just going to make a few figure 8 wraps to keep them separated. You get that nice V wing. And then you can always make wraps in front and behind. You want to try not to make too many because you don't want to have that bulky for when you go to wrap your hackle. Like I said, I didn't do the greatest job of lining my tips there, but you get the idea. We're going to come back to the bend here. And I've got, for the tail, I have this is an old Coachman Cape feather, kind of has a furnace quality to it. I'm just going to use this for the tail. That's the one thing is, as genetic hackles gotten better and better, there's fewer and fewer of these long feathers to be found, but you can still pick up old capes pretty cheap. So then I've got those aligned. I've probably got 8 or 10 hackle barbs. Randy, yes, I believe the videos will be saved on the page. Make a wrap and just kind of check my length. I want the tail to be about the same length as the body. About the length of the hook. Maybe a hair longer if I'm going Catskill style. It could be almost 2 times the length sometimes. I really enjoy the Catskill flies, but sometimes I don't love fishing them. I don't love the way they ride. So I find shortening that tail and shortening the hackle just a little bit can be the ticket for me. And I'm certainly not dogging on Catskill style tires, but that's just one thing that I've learned. So I should have mentioned as I was rambling there that what I did is I'm trimming off the tail right behind the bump from where I tied the wings in, so you get kind of that smooth transition, ideally from the tail to the wing bump. And next step here, I've got some. This is the UTC oval French tinsel, and small. My preference is the Garden, I believe it's pronounced, but I don't have any in small at the moment, so this will do just fine. And I'm going to tie it in on my side here. Propping that tail up so it sits right. So I've got that tied in on my side, wrapped all the way back to where the tail's tied in. And for the dubbing, I am pretty true to form on the dubbing here. It's a mix of muskrat, hare's ear, and I used brown Angora goat rather than seal, but it gives just a little bit of that flash and kind of that natural rustiness that looking for here, but muskrat's pretty hard to find in a actual dubbing form. I had to get a little piece of skin and trim that and make it myself. But as I dub this on, a little bit's going to go a long ways, so I'll probably actually pull a little bit of the dub off here. But really fine dubbing noodle at the top. So I've got more than enough here. So let's start here, making pretty sparse. I don't mind if that thread shows through at the back. In fact, I kind of like it. I've been find myself doing that more and more on just any dry fly, like allowing the thread to poke through and give a little more depth to the color. Let's see, yeah, pulling off, I left myself more dubbing than I even needed after that. Sparsely dubbing that, keeping the body relatively slim. The muskrat isn't the friendliest to work with, mixed with that seal, but has a great look to it. Kind of that natural gray with the rusty seal. And then I'm just wrapping forward with the oval tinsel, making some nice spaced out wraps, and I try to get 4 or 5 wraps there. Tie that off right behind the wing, and then I'm going to swing my thread in front of the wing, and then I like to tie this off on my side just in front of the wing rather than building up a bunch of bulk behind the wing there where it tends to get bulky. And so hopefully you can see that, and I'm going to trim that off right next to the hook. Make just a couple more wraps to cover up the end of the tinsel before I tie my hackle in. And for the hackle, I was pretty excited when I started reading Atherton's description that he used rusty dun on this, because it might be my favorite color of hackle. I think it has just a super buggy color, and this feather I picked is from it's the Hebrew minor line. I think the rusty dun's only in the Hebrew minor line, but it's a little bit on the dark side, but it has just a great color to it, some speckly stuff. And I'm going to get in here just before I tie the hackle and make it difficult on myself. I'm going to get in and trim out some of the long dubbing bits. Since it is a mayfly imitation, I want it to be somewhat tidy. Get that tail to sit just how I want. All right, good enough. So one thing I like to do when I prep my feather for tying in on a dry like this especially, it's really important to get the orientation right when you start wrapping. So I strip just a few fibers on the side that I'll be wrapping, that'll be laying on the body of the fly. So you can see I have just a few more fibers stripped on the inside as opposed to the outside there. And that'll just help me so that the feather lays nicely when I make those first couple wraps. Really, it's just the first wrap, if anything. Hey, Casey. Long time no talk, man. Trim that stem. So I want to tie this in right about where my thread's at right now. And I'm going to tie it in with I always heard the shiny side, but the shiny side facing out, so that essentially I'm going to be wrapping that to face forward. Trying to work around this wing here without doing that. There we go. just a couple wraps right behind, because I'm going to make a few wraps with the hackle right behind the wing, and then jump to the front. Don't jinx me, Randy. The last time I tied live, I broke thread twice. And just a little bit more dubbing here to conceal that thread. And keep in mind, every wrap you're making at this point is really, kind of impacts what's happening to the wing as far as how that wing's going to stand. Especially once you start building dubbing up there. And like I said, I'm not tying this catskill style, so I'm not going to leave bare hook at the front. I'm going to wrap my hackle right up to the eye, or just enough to give me a head. Oh man, see, Randy, you jinxed me. Broke that stem. I was trying to force it to. See, I've got these few stray fibers here that I didn't see when I tied that thing in. Rookie move. That's what happens when I'm tying live. I get just a little bit nervous. Alright, we'll do it better this time. So, there. That's what I should have done the first time, is make sure that feather's laying the way I want it to. And, of course, now I misplaced my dubbing. There we go. That banana laying around. It's all good. I can recover from it. We're not watching. Got a picture of the audience in their underwear. Isn't that the trick? Also doesn't help, it's about 800 degrees in my fly tying room. My hands are getting sweaty. Thanks, Randy. Alright, so now I can wrap this hackle. I did that intentionally just to make everybody feel better. You're not alone when you break feathers, you break thread. So what I want to keep in mind as I'm wrapping this hackle, it's not going to look super pretty until I'm done, but trying not to grab any of these mallard flank fibers, which it looks like. Maybe I didn't. But then also, I should have mentioned, as I'm making these wraps, I want to make one wrap really tight up behind the wing, and then one wrap really tight in front of the wing. Then it helps avoid that gap that you'll get a lot of times if you don't. But never crisscrossing wraps and just touching wraps here. So now I'm tying off here. I always like to make one or two wraps in front before I let go of my thread, just to avoid that coming undone. Trimming that off just as close as I can. A good pair of scissors with a sharp point here makes a big difference. So don't worry about the hackle looking too pretty just yet. I'm going to come in and preen it out just a little bit. Doing the same thing there. Is a little more subtle to see because the head's pretty short on this one, but I did make my wraps from back to front. And then I'll come in here and situate. I got a couple pieces of dubbing. That is one thing, like with the natural dubbing versus some of the modern like super fine dubs that we have. The fibers are a little bit more unruly. You gotta be careful with them, but don't be afraid to trim out what you don't want. So I want to make sure my wings stay kind of grouped together there. And once you get them worked through the hackle there and sitting how you want, they'll they'll pretty much stay that way. And if you get these ones always drive me crazy. Not a big deal, but you can usually take your scissors and just kind of prop them back up. But that's kind of my version of the Atherton 6 there, and it's a super buggy, great looking dry fly. Hopefully that's still in focus, but yeah, fun little pattern. I encourage everybody to look into some of the classics. I think there's nothing wrong with a lot of our modern ties, but I think that it's kind of fun, and there's a lot to be learned by flipping through some of the old books, whether it be Art Flick or John Atherton or Sylvester Names or whoever. I mean, and some of the great steelhead tires too. There's a ton to be learned there. Let's see. Looks like we have a little more time. Maybe I'll tie one more quick little soft hackle here. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate it. Here, I'll whip up one more soft hackle here just for fun. So I got a few minutes left. Stick with the same thread. How about I'll do one similar to the first one I did, but I'm going to use regular thread. I'm going to put a tail on it this time. So for this one, I got this Brahma Hen Cape. These are really nice and relatively inexpensive. And I like that they come with the leg patches there. I don't know what those called. I'm not super chicken savvy, other than I like their feathers a lot. But these feathers have great modeling. They have a little bit thicker stem too. They're almost partridge-like. Thanks, Sean. I get a lot of enjoyment out of tying the old classic stuff. To me, there's a lot of ways to challenge yourself with tying some of the older stuff. Our modern materials are great, but there's in a lot of ways they've made it much easier, which is great, but it's also fun to have a challenge here and there. So I'm gonna use this Brahma for both the tail and for the hackle. I had one laying here, half a feather, so I stripped just a few barbs off from that for the tail here that I'm going to tie in. Tie this in right on the top, and I'm just improvising here, so mix up do something a little bit different. Just get that tied in. Doesn't have to be pretty. I think I'm going to do a dubbed body on this one. So again, I've got a amber wire, because as I mentioned, it's the best color wire. It's not. I just like tying with it. Let's see, what dubbing color do we have here? Got a little bit of, I'll use the same one that I used on the first fly, the blend of Hare's Mask and red, kind of a burnt orange dyed pine squirrel. I'll use this here. You can see this stuff's really buggy. Sometimes you get these like coarse fibers from the Hare's Mask. I'll just pick those out. So I'm going to do a little bit of a loose body here as I get towards the front, because I want these hair fibers to stick out. Panfish in Indiana, yeah, I mean, I've never found bluegill to be too picky, but I'll bet any one of the flies I've tied tonight you could catch panfish on. I just have this one. Oh, that was a piece here. Clip out this one. I have this pet peeve where I love the dubbing to stick out and be buggy, but it bothers me if it sticks back along the tail. I don't know why. I'm a little bit of a picky tire, but I've got those buggy fibers. You can come in with like a bodkin and pick those out if you want it to be really buggy, but I'm just going to leave this one the way it is. And then here at the front of the abdomen here, I'm going to throw a little bit of fiery brown alpaca dub as a thorax before I tie in my front hackle, since I've got a little bit of room here. These are really long fibers, so if you don't get them twisted on tight around your thread, they tend to kind of bulk out. This would be a good one to throw a few lead wraps under if you don't want to swing your soft hackle. You could just fish it behind a nymph, or I'm sorry. Yeah, I mean you could trail it behind a nymph, or fish it as a dropper beneath a dry. Fish it as a sulfur nymph or as a PMD nymph. So this is one of the Brahma hen feathers that Badger dyed. What is this? Badger dyed March brown. There you go. Good March brown color. I'm going to do the same thing on this one I did on the front hackle for the trout spay fly, where I cut that tip to a triangle. Tie that in. I can grab it. Like I said, that just makes it so that I don't have to come back and trim off the tip. Fold my feather. It's always important to get like that leading hackle barb to lay back, then all the other ones kind of follow it. Even if you twist the stem, it should still want to lay back. I'm going to make 3 wraps on this one because this Brahma is just a little bit more sparse. Wiggle my thread in between the fibers there, and then come back and nip that out. Trap down any of the remaining dubbing, try to clean up the head a little bit, and then do a double whip finish here. There you go. I left that thorax pretty buggy. Kind of has that emerging look to it, or like I said, you could fish it with with a few lead wraps underneath there as a nymph, or behind a dry. Well, that's what I'm going to tie for tonight. I appreciate everybody tuning in. Does anybody have any more questions for me before I sign off here? Just a couple minutes. Thanks, Bill. Good to see you on here. Yeah, like I said, thanks again for everybody for tuning in. Thanks again to Whiting for having me on here. It was a lot of fun time with everybody. I hope you enjoyed it. Do you fish soft hackle for steelhead? Yeah, absolutely. I've tied these in a little bit bigger sizes. I would not call myself an accomplished steelhead angler by any means, but I recommend you look up Alec Jackson's spade style flies. They're really simple, but have caught probably countless steelhead on them. Not me, but people. Alec Jackson, pretty renowned steelhead fisherman and tire. Well, thanks again, guys. I had a great time. Hopefully, get the opportunity to tie again live sometime soon. If you want to see more of my flies, I think talking to Whiting sounds like they'll probably post links and everything, but you can find my Instagram page. That's probably where the best place to see all my fly tying, but it's just my name, Tim_Sickles. And if you ever have any questions, feel free to reach out to me directly on there too. Happy to answer them as I can. But thanks everyone. Have a great night.